Warriors of National Guard Recruiting. This is Command Sergeant Major Retired Dave Eustace with Military Recruiting Experts for one of the last Training Tuesday podcasts. It is my duty and obligation to tell you that we have 19 processing days remaining in 26 calendar days on this Tuesday, September 5th. We have the opportunity to be with Command Sergeant Major Gladbach from the great state of Missouri, and we're going to talk about his recruiting life and his recruiting philosophies. So without further ado, Sergeant Major, we usually open these up with just telling your National Guard recruiting story.
All right. First off, Dave, appreciate you having me on. My Guard story started in 1999, the summer before my senior year. I joined the Missouri Army National Guard as a 13 Bravo Field Artillery cannon crew member. For one reason, really, Dave, and that reason was to get a free college education. I was a 3-sport athlete in school. There was no conflicts going on at the time. I remember my recruiter telling me, "You're joining the Guard. We haven't done anything since the Great Flood of 1993. And so I knew that I could, withstand 9 weeks of basic training and an AIT to get a free college education. And I aspired to be a pharmacist and was accepted into University of Missouri, Kansas City pre-pharmacy school. So completed my training, went to my first semester of pre-pharmacy school, and it wasn't a good experience for me. My grades weren't where they needed to be. So I transferred schools and was just taking college courses to get my GPA back where it needed to be. And I didn't really have a direction at that point. So plan A failed and I didn't have a plan B. Fortunately for me, in 2003, I had the opportunity to go to Germany with the artillery unit. We transferred to military police unit and spent about 16 months in Germany. Returned home early of 2005, and the recruiting position was open in my field artillery unit. Applied for it, knew the great things that the Guard had done for me already, and I really just wanted to share that, and I had passion to do so. So from 2005 to 2015, I recruited in a small armory in Chillicothe, Missouri, E5 all the way through E7. And so almost 11 years in one position. From there, I went to the Kansas City MEPS as a guidance counselor and spent just over a year there before having the opportunity to accept a position as a section chief in Southeast Missouri, Area 5. It was 5.5 hours away from home. My wife and I had built what we believed to be our forever home on 40 acres in the small town that we both grew up in, graduated school from. We're raising 2 small children. Their grandparents lived there, and had 72 hours to make the decision on whether I was going to be a lifetime E7 or get promoted to a section chief. And we thought long and hard about it. We prayed about it. And ultimately the decision came down to, we didn't really want to set the example for our daughters that, hey, go get a college education and come back and live in Marceline, Missouri, where there's 2,000 people. So we took the leap of faith and moved down to Southeast Missouri. When I got down there, Area 5 had 17 enlistments in the first 5 months of that year. And they were in bad shape, and they needed some purpose, drive, and motivation. And the next full year of recruiting, we finished 3rd in the state out of 10 teams. And then my second full year as a section chief, we were the top team or top area in the state of Missouri. I say that recruiting was at a good place then. There was 4 out of the 10 teams in the state of Missouri, or 4 areas, I say, that completed over 100% of their mission. And so we never looked backwards. We competed every year down there. And in early 2001, I was promoted to the operations sergeant major in the state of Missouri, and did that for about a year before becoming the CSM. So took over the CSM duties in March of 2022, and here I am today.
Well, first of all, I probably knew it, but maybe I didn't know it, that you were a 13 Bravo, because as you can see the background, I was a 13 Bravo. And I also grew up in town of 2,000 people. So I bet you're a pretty big deal in that town, just like me. But you've had some successes as a recruiter, and you were an Expert 7, correct?
Correct.
And Directors 54 in your state.
I was never Directors 54.
But Expert 7 in a pretty good sized recruiting organization. So you've had the ups and downs. I'm curious what you would say. What is the pathology of both, of the highs and the lows in recruiting?
That's a great question, and my message has never changed. I mean, from my first year as a production recruiter till now, I tell people outside the organization, whether they're civilians or just, our new recruiters that we hire, recruiting's an emotional roller coaster. It's highs and lows, as you mentioned, Dave, and you got to be able to grind through those lows. But, like Arnold Palmer said, the harder I work, the luckier I am. And it's true in recruiting. Like, you will be on the emotional high a lot more often than those emotional lows if you just grind out and do the work. I don't know, Dave, we've talked a lot, but one other similarity that we have, I think, is we're both state champion wrestlers. And I think my success through my military career probably goes back to those days, grinding out in a wrestling room, against my teammates and opponents. But it's never quit. I mentioned at the beginning, I was never Directors 54. I was top 10 several times, but never Directors 54. But I stayed the path and I stayed consistent. And you've mentioned it a lot here recently. There's a path to E8 in the recruiting battalion. If you're successful, you do the right things. You don't have any moral hiccups or anything. You're gonna make E8. And so there was a lot of Directors 54s that were my peers that just didn't withstand the grind, or whenever they hit those emotional lows, they decided to take another path. And I fought through it, and I'm fortunate to be where I am today. I'm fortunate that the state leadership in the state of Missouri selected me to be the CSM, and I think Missouri's going to get itself back on the map here pretty quickly.
But one of the things that nobody wants to hear is that all of our problems in recruiting are solved by recruiting, and especially the younger recruiters. The answer of just work harder is kind of tough for them to receive. But you've been at this for a long time, and you're probably closer to the end than the beginning, certainly, as the CSM. What has kept you at it?
I'm just competitive by nature. I don't know any other way. So whatever I'm doing, I'm competing. Sometimes I don't even realize that, I'm competing against a stranger walking down the street until I poor guy didn't even know I was competing against him. So yeah, it's easy just to say work harder, but ultimately, like, we want to work more efficiently. There was days in Chillicothe, Missouri, in that armory or weeks, I guess, where I could look back and do an AAR and say, man, I spent about 4 hours this week actually doing recruiting things. Fortunately for me, like, I was able to realize that after a week, and it didn't take me a month, or it didn't take me 60 or 90 days of being behind to be like, whoa, I got to get myself on track. So I'm realistic when it comes to that. And I know there's days that our recruiters are going to spend time in their office, BSing with the full-time unit support. But if we can get back to those recruiting activities, those daily disciplines, I think the recruiting battalion and the recruiting personnel have the opportunity to work less than any other full-time unit support person in the AGR program.
Well, we have this chasm between the leadership, the command team of the organization, and sometimes the NCICs, but almost all the time in recruiters, of what the command really wants, and how that is translated to a recruiter. And to me, a good question to ask of someone that is on a command team is, what is your ideal recruiter and what is your ideal NCIC? Because I think that the recruiters and NCICs would be surprised at the answer.
Yeah, I mean, we can define ourselves as a sales organization. And so if we sit on a hiring board and we're looking for that person that maybe has charisma, energy, they bring life to the interview. But, you know, I've been here for almost 20 years in the recruiting battalion, and it's not always the person with the most charisma that has the most success. I've heard you say it multiple times on your podcast, and I believe it to be true. Like, most of the time when we hire prior service Marines, they make mission, and it's not because they're the most charismatic, but it's because it's in their culture to make mission and to put in the work. You know, and I've played sports with a lot of people that don't have the most athletic ability, but they go way further than the person who's the most athletic, but just doesn't put in the work. And, you know, I've seen the meme several times recently, and it's like a job interview, and on one side it says success, and then the other side it says doing what it takes to be successful. And everybody's in line for success, but nobody wants to be in the line, you know, to do what it takes to be successful.
Yeah.
So what the ideal recruiter to me is the person that's going to come to work and handle rejection well, because we hear a lot of that, but to keep putting one foot in front of the other and you know, getting to plant the mission flag.
How about NCIC?
My message, and it goes from E5s all the way to E9s in our recruiting battalion, is you have to have a mindset one grade higher than where you're currently at. So you can't become an EA and think that you made it. Not while I'm the CSM. The standard's going to be held. We've heard recently, well, you know, I'm just trying to take care of my recruiters. Well, you take care of your recruiters by holding them to a standard so they can perform this job after you've retired or maybe take your place. But taking care of your people is making them successful. It's not, you know, coming up with excuses. So when I'm looking for section chiefs, I'm looking for those that are bought in to the mission. You know, not just here to, hey, I made it E8. Like I always said growing up, Dave, if I can make E8, you know, I made it. You know, I can't wait. Like they have the easiest job in the Missouri Army National Guard. And I grew up in 11 years of recruiting. I rarely saw my section chief, and that's the way it was. And then the section chiefs never retired, like because they made it. I mean, they were getting E8 pay, and it didn't feel like there was a lot of responsibility on them. And then when I became a section chief, I was like, wow, this is the hardest job I've ever had. You know, I was in charge of at times 13 recruiters. I was in charge of an RSP program with over 100 RSP soldiers in it, and I was constantly dealing with a lot of negatives and, you know, counseling grown men that I thought should have known better on certain situations. But being a section chief isn't easy. No job in the recruiting battalion is easy. But you got to be bought in. You got to be thinking about not just my area's mission, but the state's mission. And that's the end goal.
Well, I do think one of the things that has really kind of gotten a lot of states off track and individuals, they're the conditions. And we fantasize about past conditions, but we get caught up in the conditions of now, and just dealing with that as a leadership team. Because my philosophy on it is probably pretty well known. It's like the conditions are the conditions. What we can't change them. If we could, we certainly would. But how have you dealt with that from COVID, which was bad, and the immediate post-COVID to me was worse. It was demonstrated in performance, our post-COVID conditions. So what have you and your commanders done to deal with just all the conditions talk?
Yeah, I think from a leadership standpoint, and maybe we were a little bit slow in the state of Missouri to recognize this, but you've got to hold people accountable. So just some examples are, hey, we can't get into the schools, post COVID, they're not letting us in. And like I said, we probably were a little bit too slow to react, but the commander and I finally said, give us your 5 toughest schools that you can't get into. I have really close ties with the Missouri State High School Activities Association. My commander is very well known, and all the community relations and chambers of commerce. So once we ask for those 5 schools, then all of a sudden our recruiters were able to get into those schools. So I think it's just, hey, there are going to be problems, but let's create solutions. But from the leadership standpoint, we can't just buy every problem that's brought to us. So if we interject and say, okay, let's go get into those schools, I'm happy to do it with you, then our recruiters are pretty creative and find a way.
Well, one of the more successful states in dealing with certainly COVID, Lieutenant Colonel retired higher at the beginning of COVID, said something to his organization. It was very unpopular, but turned out to be quite successful and effective, is to say, this is a horrible situation, certainly, but I've received no notification that the mission is going to go away. We got to figure this out. And I imagine a lot of people were upset with that kind of communication, but it was true. And they, post-COVID, or when COVID was still going on, they were one of few states that made missions. So sometimes just being honest about the circumstance makes a big difference. Very often, we can't tell our soldiers what they want to hear because it's not going to be true. We're not going to be able to tell them tomorrow that Genesis is going away. It's here. So I'm kind of curious about the current times for your organization. And one of the reasons why I asked you to be on is a few years back when your team was that top team, I didn't think there certainly wasn't 3 other states that I could think of that had a better recruiting operation than your team. And since then, we've had some of the downtimes. And so having that knowledge and experience of really high times and the down times, what are you looking as the pathway to get back to those really high performing times?
Well, I'll give credit to Command Sergeant Major Matt Marr on that. His message was consistent. We need 100 enlistments a month. And it was also protect the battalion. And I don't think a lot of people really understood what he was saying, but shortly after he left, we had 13 control grade E8 positions during his tenure here. And that's what he was meaning. Like, you have got to stay successful. You have got to enlist 100 people a month, or state leadership is going to say, well, if you're not performing that, you don't need those control grades. You don't need those opportunities for your production recruiters to become section chiefs. And Missouri lost 2 control grades, and it was kind of a dagger that we all probably dwelled on a little bit too long. But to answer your question, moving forward, I heard Ed Milet tell a story about his son, who was a college golfer, and they were in Vegas on his golf team, and he was in the hunt to win the tournament, and some of his teammates didn't make the cut. And when Ed talked to his son that evening, he could tell his son was kind of down, and his son said, "Well, Dad, we're in Vegas. I'm 21 years old, and all my friends, like all my teammates, they're going out on the town tonight, and I'm stuck in my room because, I'm in contention to win this tomorrow." And Ed told him, he said, "Son, winning is more fun than fun is fun." And, when you think about that, we just finished our annual training for the year. And I told my commander prior to going, I said, "I want you to observe something. This is going to be my 19th award ceremony. But when we do the social after the day's training, I say, I want you to pay attention that who's down there and who's having fun. And it's all the people that made mission. They're the ones that are down there, they're communicating, they're having fun. And the ones that didn't make mission, they linger around in the back, or they find their own group of people that are going to buy into their excuses of why they didn't make it, or they just might not even come out to the social because they're embarrassed." So for me, like I opened with, I'm naturally competitive. I hate to see where Missouri ranks on the scorecard right now compared to the other 53 states and territories. So moving forward, we're, hold the standard. We're transitioning right now. So we always did a July 1 through June 30 recruiting year, and we're transitioning to the fiscal year. So, we have recruiters right now making business decisions, Dave, if they're going to make that summer mission. And we talked to the section chiefs about that last Thursday on our production call. So we got to make sure that they make the right decision, because the state of Missouri needs those enlistments this fiscal year.
And I do think that we've seen lots of turnarounds in organizations, and we've seen people riding high go in the other direction. But generally speaking, minus the normal turnover, it's about the same team. And the difference ends up being we make a decision that's better than that business decision. It's the decision that we make mission. I'm part of we, and we're going to make mission. I can control what is in my left and right limit, and I'm going to make sure I secure my lane. And whenever we get to 50% plus one of the organization that is at that spot, starts to be peer influence. And that changes, it's game changing in the organization. And I do think there's plenty of staff sergeants out there that listen to this podcast that are hungry to be winners and would be the people that would step up and say, yeah, we're going to get this sucker done. And I'm going to remind my peers that I'm not writing their contracts. They have to do it. And so I do think the opportunity is awesome to get it turned around. But right now, I just got a couple more questions for you. I don't want to take too much of your time up on this holiday. Is, like I mentioned before, you got a lot of years behind you in recruiting. And so there are many, many recruiters and NCICs that want to have that objective to be a sergeant major or the command sergeant major of their organization. What is your advice to them right now? What can they do to position themselves to get to that level?
Production. I mean, in the simplest form, I had a conversation last week. We had our SMAG 5 fall meeting in Omaha, Nebraska, and we were able to bring our high performers. So we brought 2 production recruiters that had a great year. We brought our top section chief. And during one of those conversations with one of our high performers, he was talking about, what does the future look like? And I might have an opportunity to move closer to the family farm and build a house. And so we kind of talked about his timeline. And if you are a production leader and a production king, you're going to be able to go wherever in the state that you want to go. And you're going to get promoted faster than your peers. You know, I have conversations every year with recruiters that, you know, hey, maybe want to move locations. And I tell them, make mission, and then the conversation is definitely in your favor. I too, you know, growing up in the recruiting battalion, and like I mentioned earlier, I never saw my section chief. Just never showed up. I mean, yeah, we had our monthly or quarterly meetings where we got together, but that usually included me driving somewhere. And so I always kind of had the aspiration of being the CSM of the recruiting battalion someday. And I've said it in every promotion speech during any of my promotion ceremonies. I learn more from bad leaders than I do from great leaders. And, you know, that's not taking anything away from you, Dave, because I look up to you and we have a lot of conversations, you know, in your spare time of how Missouri can be better. But there was things that I wanted to change that I experienced as a production recruiter to the CSM. And so moving forward, the state of Missouri, we want to live in the top right quadrant, and that is taking care of people while making production. And I think the two go hand in hand. If we take care of our people, they're going to produce. And if we produce, the people are going to be taken care of.
Well, one of the reasons that you take so much away from poor leaders is because in our careers, we don't come across that many really good ones. And you would say that the United States Army is world-class when it comes to making leaders of all kinds, and how challenging it is for an individual in their career to really come across a really good leader. So that tells you how hard it is. And I think that's one thing that's overlooked in those junior people that you're talking to about production is the thing. Production is credibility. Credibility is influence. Influence means advancement. I mean, that is the reality, and not everybody wants to hear that. My last question for you is just because I want this to be I want it to be on record, and we got video and we got audio that we'll be able to go back to this day a year from now and know that it will happen, because I know the organization is going to get to where you want it to get. But a year from now, where is the Missouri Army National Guard Recruiting Battalion going to be?
We're going to be strong. We're going to be full, and we're going to be back in the top 5 recruiting battalions in the nation. Our voice at NGB is going to be heard. We're going to be resourced, and the state of Missouri is going to have the end strength that it needs to fulfill their missions. I could tell by the beginning of your opening question there that this challenge was coming up, and I look forward to it. It's my goal every day to compete and to influence, and I'm glad that you brought that up. As a CSM or a command team, you know, I don't think that you necessarily have the influence over the production recruiters that you really thought that you would have coming into the position. And I've had the opportunity to have conversations with some of our greatest NCOs in our organization and talk about, hey, the message that you share on social media and the message that you share with your peers has way more influence than any email or speech on a podium that I give during annual training or area meeting that I'll ever have. Because you're currently in the fight with them with the same rejections. And then I tell everyone too, like, recruiting is hard. It's always been hard. It will always be hard. But we join the Army and we're soldiers and we do hard things. So you can either say, oh, it's hard and I'll never be successful, or you can choose to do the hard things. And that's why we hired you to be a part of this great battalion. So choose your hard. Do you want this to be hard because you're 3 months behind, or do you want this to be hard because you have to go talk to people you don't know?
Yeah, and I think that's a good place to end it. Now we got it. It's down top 5 in the country. And I know the recruiters in Missouri listen to this. And will just say to you as a message directly, and to everybody that is struggling right now, you don't even know what it is like when everybody wins. You don't know what it's like when everybody wins. That's the kind of party that you have to have 5 hours away from the state headquarters, because we're going to enjoy it. It's that kind of party. And there's enough trophies to go around. There's enough ribbon for everybody. And I'm confident your team can get it done. So I really appreciate you doing this. I know that it's possible, and I know that you guys will put in the work to make it happen. So thanks again, and get after it.
Hey, Dave, on behalf of the 54 states and territories, we appreciate all the time and energy that you put in to your MRE training, to the podcast. I've told you personally, I hate to see this thing go away because I look forward to it every Tuesday morning. But I understand, your reasons behind it, but please continue to share your wealth of knowledge with the force, and we can't do it without you. So on behalf of the state of Missouri, we appreciate what you do for the entire 54.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Thanks
All right.
again. Enjoy the day.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.